before we bring in Bob. I wasn't even thinking I was going to say that, but he is truly one of the great broadcasters, Ronnie. Not just baseball broadcasters, one of the greatest broadcasters I've ever seen in my broadcasting career or in my life.
100%. You know, I'm lucky enough to sit next to him for some broadcasts, and I never feel this way about anyone. I'll be watching the game, concentrating on what's going on, and Bob will frame something with his words that I'll look away from the field, I'll look at him, and I'll go, oh, my goodness. How does he do that?
Right.
And then back to the field.
There we go.
Yeah.
And back to Bob Costas right now. We bring in Bob Costas himself. Bob, we don't want to embarrass you by flattering you, but it's kind of this is your life. Good to have you on here, Bob.
This is all a bit much, but at this point, I'll take it. And, you know, the next thing is a gold watch, a pat on the back, and all. I get that.
We're honoring you. We're not retiring you here, Bob. Bob, let's kick this around a little bit now. I have a few questions. Do you remember the first ball game that you called? Anywhere, recorded, not recorded? What's the first ball game you called?
In 1981, there was I'm not counting doing something into a tape recorder at the old MacArthur Stadium in Syracuse when I was an undergraduate, like in 1972 or something. But on KMOX in St. Louis, there was a baseball strike, as you know, in 81. And they filled the time with doing minor league games. And the Cardinals had an affiliate in Springfield. And so they weren't going to send Jack Buck to go do that. So they sent me to do it. So that was actually the first couple. Did a couple of those games. And actually, now that I think of it, in 1980, I did a few games for NBC. I just started at NBC. I did 2 with Tim McCarver and 1 with Bobby Valentine in 1980. So that was actually first.
Okay, let me go back before that then. Young Bob Costas on Long Island. What shaped you as a baseball broadcaster? What were you listening to? What helped or what planted that in you?
You know, I've always said this about all sports. If it was basketball, I'm hearing Marty Glickman in my head or Marv Albert. When as a kid, you're shooting baskets on the schoolyard. Or if I'm throwing a rubber ball against the stoop, as we used to say in New York, or playing wiffle ball, Little League, whatever it is. In baseball, I heard Mel Allen. I heard Red Barber. Later, I heard with the Mets, Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson and Ralph Kiner. And for a brief period of time when I was 9, 10 years old, we lived in Los Angeles or Redondo Beach. And that's when I first heard Vin Scully and that melodic, rhythmic thing that only he could do at that level. And I've always said you shouldn't copy anybody, but I think I was influenced by all those people. And then as a young guy, when I got to KMOX at age 22, I absorbed a lot of Jack Buck. I didn't copy any of them, but I was influenced by all of them.
Were you always a kid shooting baskets that going, Costas, banks it in? Were you calling your own games, Bob?
Yes.
Of course, right.
Kind of annoying to the other kids in the neighborhood.
Probably the other kid. I think the other kids appreciated it, Bob. That's what I think. Little did they know.
In retrospect, they all claim now, oh, yeah, we knew. We knew he was going to do this. They just wanted to get rid of me at the time.
Right, at the time, they were throwing elbows at you. There are so many different, for people who don't even think this through, don't bother, there are so many different facets of broadcasting. Again, you're an excellent interviewer, excellent host. Did you want to call baseball games, or did that just come as a result of the career?
You know what I dreamed of was calling baseball games on the radio, because that was the classic thing. In my mind, growing up, radio was still primary in the 1960s when I was watching the games, or listening to the games, I should say. But then as time went by, being at NBC, my best avenue was to be part of the Game of the Week, and I was lucky enough to get that assignment and lucky enough to work with the great Tony Kubek. He was already a staple, had worked with Joe Garagiola and Kurt Gowdy, and had been on pennant-winning Yankee teams. There I am with Tony. I think that's in Oakland, the first one, and I think the other one is, well, whatever it is. But there's Tim McCarver. But Tony was so good to me because he could have thought, well, who is this kid? But in effect, he put his arm around my shoulder and walked me into the manager's offices, the clubhouses, the batting cage. And the implication was, if this kid is okay with me, he should be okay with you. So that smoothed the way for me.
Do you remember, this is my last one, I'll let Ronnie in here eventually. Do you remember the first time you were in the catbird seat, as Red Barber calls it, where you're at a major league stadium and you looked out and you realize you're the voice of this game now?
Yeah, it was probably the game in 1980. It was the Red Sox and the Angels, and it was one of the NBC games of the week with Tim McCarver, who actually would become active again in September of 80 to become a 4-decade man. And I guess he was still Steve Carlton's personal catcher, but at that point, he wasn't on a roster. So I did the game with Tim McCarver. And how long ago was it? Yaz hit a homer in that game, and Rod Carew stole a base.
Nice.
That's how long.
I thought you'd remember it, and you do. All right, Ronnie, go ahead.
Hey, Bob, every game has its own rhythm and timing. Baseball is such a great collaborative exercise. You spoke about Tony Kubek. I think of the other partners you've had. Remember Bob Uecker and Joe Morgan? That seemed like chalk and cheese, but it worked perfectly.
Yeah, because Joe was more straightforward and serious, and Uke, as you know, is hysterically funny, although he's also a good classic play-by-play guy on the radio for the Brewers. And I knew Uke for a long time, so I was able to set him up with some things that I knew would lead to some funny lines or some good anecdotes. And I think the combination, either one of them alone probably wouldn't have been as good, with me at least, as they were together. So that was a good combination. And then subsequently, when the Baseball Network comes along, I work with Jim Cott, one of the nicest guys, and his history with the game goes back so far. And he was sharp into his 80s, so he had that frame of reference. John Smoltz, before he went exclusively with Fox, and we know how good he is as an analyst, and now with you. So I never drew a short straw, that's for sure.
You know, Bob, I was just thinking, in preparation for a game, it's really changed. I mean, you can literally read about the game you're going to do for 24 hours, and you still haven't covered everything that you could see. How has that changed since the early days when you prepared for a game compared to how do you do it now?
Yeah, you know, I can remember literally clipping things with a scissors, clipping things out of the newspaper. I had a notebook on each team in the major leagues because any of them could show up on the NBC game of the week, and I was doing it old school. I was scotch taping it together. Oh, here's a note about Eddie Murray in case I do the Orioles. Now everything is at your fingertips, but there's so much of it, you lose sleep at night thinking, what have I overlooked? What does some viewer know that I don't? But it's just impossible, and I think that we've settled on, at least I have, the idea that you need to get the important stuff out there, the important narrative of the game, the series, the season, in some cases of a career, when you talk about someone like Clayton Kershaw, and then just let the game play out and do a good job of kind of setting whatever the scene turns out to be.
Well, I can't wait to see it tonight, Bob, and just to watch it. And right, there is something. It's a little different listening to those games in the '80s, right? It was a little. The packaging was different. It was a little more wide open, a little looser, and I look forward to seeing it tonight. So again, Bob, we can honor a man while he's still working. This is all fine, and enjoy it tonight. And thanks for being with us for a few minutes.
I'm looking at it as the 3 Vs: Vasgersian, Verducci, and my valedictory.
Take a bow, Bob. Thank you so much, Bob. We'll talk to you. There we go.